the Incom UT-60D, aka the U-Wing. Hi, Misha here, and we're going to return to Star Wars. This wasn't really a planned video, but this came in, and I was actually quite impressed. This is the Micro Galaxies U-Wing that just came out. It's in nominally 1/72 scale. We'll talk about it. It's probably not quite there, but close enough for government work. And while it's not die-cast, we don't really have a lot of U-Wings. Here we have the two small scale I've had. One from the Black Series and one from Hot Wheels. And actually with these, for once, I think the Hot Wheels is nicer. Usually the Black Series is, but we'll get to that. Of course, they're quite tiny scale. Interesting spacecraft, support ship, starfighter even, from Rogue One, although it's appeared in Rebels and other media. And it's actually based on a real-world aircraft, helicopter specifically, the Sikorsky Blackhawk, which is named the UH-60 or MH-60. So the name is actually a tribute, UT-60D, but it also fits in very well with the Incom line because for decades we've had the T-65B quote-unquote X-Wing. So it fits both purposes and slots in really well. Before we talk about the fictional and movie history of the U-Wing and features, let's look at the real-world example. This is a 1/72 scale model from Air Force One. So nominally the same scale as the Micro Galaxy Squad. And it is of the MH variant. So on to the spinny thing for the spinny thing. When you think of helicopters, even today, the good old UH-1 Iroquois, the Huey, comes to mind. And I think it did for the designers at Star Wars as well. So it's kind of interesting that in the end the U-Wing was more of a Blackhawk tribute, but it also makes sense. Of course, the Huey made a name for itself. It started off as a utility helicopter, but it really evolved into all kinds of things. Medevac, as the Frog, it was a gunship, weapons platform, and it did really well for its day and time. But by the 70s, it was getting a little long in the tooth, and the US really wanted something more survivable, sturdy, a little more versatile. Of course, more lift, more range, always a good thing. So what would become the Blackhawk here started off as early as 1972. We would have trials. The two main competitors were Boeing and Sikorsky, and by 74 there were prototypes known as the YUH-60A. 4 would be built, and soon Sikorsky would be the winner. By 1976 we would have some low rate production as they worked out some of the bugs, and it would go into service mid-1979. The original UH-60A was pretty much a utility chopper, but there were always plans to specialize and accommodate. It's about 64 feet long, had a crew of 2 pilots and 2 crew chiefs, and could support up to 11 troops, or in a medevac role up to 6 stretchers, or it could carry about 2,600 pounds internally, so 1,200 kilos, or underslung up to 9,000 pounds. And it really was a lot more durable, survivable. It was also faster than the Huey. It could cruise at about 280 kilometers, up to nearly 300 max speed. Altitude of a little under 20,000 feet, depending on exactly which variant. And first saw military deployment in 1983 in Grenada. Eventually the A would give way to the L, which was an upgraded model. These were always using 2 turboshaft engines, General Electric's, just a next generation power plant, and then with the L you would get upgraded engines and just better everything, revisions. Those would kind of be spec'd out around 86 and start to go into production in 89, and would be produced for almost 2 decades. Around 2007, the UT-60M, the newer model, would be introduced. It had been in development for a number of years. It had a modern glass cockpit, further improved, upgraded engines with better lift and all that good stuff. You get the deal. But this, like I said, is the MH-60, which is more of the attack close air support version. Now you see guns in the doors, which were manned by the crew chiefs. The smallest gun they would typically have would be 2 M240s FNs, which would be 7.62 NATO caliber. If you needed a little more oomph, you could go to the M134, but it was still in 7.62 NATO. And kind of the maximum for these typical door guns were 2 GAU 19s, which were 12.4 millimeter or 50 caliber Browning type guns. They were Gatlins. And if you needed more, you could bolt on 2 stub wings, and under those you could sling a number of things, rocket pods, even a couple of dumb bombs, some guided missiles, tow types, and Hellfires, what have you. So these could be armed up for sure. From the get-go, the Black Hawk, as it was known, was very durable for a helicopter, very survivable, had good provisions to protect the crew in a crash, which was actually seen very early on in the 70s during testing. Not only did a crashed Black Hawk protect its crew, it was actually able to be refurbished and put back into flight readiness. So yeah, a little better speed, maneuverability compared to the old Huey. Could take a hit a little better, so on and so forth, and has had several specialized versions, night fighting included, over the years. And of course there is the Seahawk, sometimes informally known as the Ocean Hawk, which was a slightly larger version tailored for naval maritime use, and it also could carry a couple of torpedoes or depth charges, so on and so forth, and also fold up for storage on a deck. So this really is quite a successful design for Sikorsky. Well over 4,000 have been built, still in service with America and foreign friendly users alike. As I said, it first saw combat in Grenada. It would really see widespread use in 1991 during the first Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm. In fact, these would help transport 5,000 troops behind Iraqi lines. It would also help with medevac, and they would become quite famous in Mogadishu in 1993. Of course, we had the film Black Hawk Down. Quite an interesting thing there. And they would have a large role to play in 2003 when the second Iraq War, Gulf War, would kick off, and the Black Hawk would be instrumental in the ending of Osama bin Laden in 2011. And that's just the very, very brief footnotes, cliff notes versions of what these have done. They get very versatile, very configurable aircraft, much like the Huey before it. And these Air Force One diecast models are pretty good. They're not Hobby Master, maybe not even quite Corgi, but they're, spinning rotors. You do have crew inside. They are pretty solidly built, and frankly, we just don't have a lot of high-end options for Blackhawks. The big makers haven't done them yet. It's either these, or you can go a little bit cheaper and get like the Altea type, and these are certainly better than those. Not that those are complete rubbish, but needs must. I've got 2 of these. I've got a more of a medevac one, but I thought the one with the door guns. I should also point out that there was even a specialized version kitted out for electronic warfare, jamming, and surveillance. Again, very versatile aircraft. It could even be fitted with extra fuel tanks to extend the loiter or range. And of course, with the guns and possible rocket pods, it could be used for close air support. This really is a worthy successor to the venerable Huey, and good call for the design team on Rogue One for basing their new spacecraft on it. So now let's move into a galaxy far away, long ago. And before I really talk about the new microgalaxy and why I like it so much, let's look back at the two smaller die-cast. Talk about the history, talk about what features these do have, because I think that'll explain why I'm so impressed with the new MGS. The U-Wing definitely resembles the X-Wing. The in-universe explanation, they both come from the same design bureau and manufacturer, Incom, and from roughly the same time period. Imperial, right before the Civil War kicked off. If you think about it, you had the ARC 170 fighter from the Clone Wars, which was kind of a medium-sized craft. It seems like Incom kind of split that up and went for a true multi-purpose starfighter, snub fighter in the T-65 X-Wing, and then went larger and more of a utility craft with the UT-60 U-Wing. And this was designed as a cargo hauler, troop transport, with the secondary thought towards close air defense, close air support, and maybe attacking fortifications, softening up things, or attacking medium to small capital ships, corvettes, frigates, maybe a cruiser, that kind of thing. So there are some elements of starfighter here, but not many. It's mostly classed as a support craft. Now, the real world explanation is simple. When they were doing Rogue One, they wanted something that was a bit of a combination of the Millennium Falcon, so, you know, a YT-1300, and an X-Wing. And it makes sense. And I don't know why. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the designs we see from Rogue One, the new ones, tend to be very, like, long-winged or finned, or in this case, technically, S-foil or strike foil. With that, let's pull the Black Series one off first. Set this back a bit. Yeah. Now this is not a small craft. Now since Star Wars is fiction, and since it's not really a technical type series, we don't even know the real length. I see anywhere from 23 to 25 meters, but of course in the show it's never really said, and I bet if we were being super nitpicky, it would be one of those things where it's kind of scene to scene, shot to shot. Oh well. And it's, you know, 8.5 meters wide. And of course we do have these foils. Now it's said that this is the landed configuration with them forward, and this Black Series does feature a landing gear. I do have a few moving parts on these, but it is very small. Hang on a second, I'm just going to get her out. Alrighty, there we go. I end up using a little floss pick, plastic one. I use that a lot. It's just one gear in front, just hinges forward. We have kind of two skids on the bottom engines for it to land. Again, they had a few moving parts on these. That's there. It's accurate enough for the size. It also has an opening cockpit. It does feel like they did try to put the 2 pilot seats in there, though they're kind of crammed in really close. As far as I know, the real Starfighter, this doesn't open. It's just there, so you have a moving part. But of course, the most important thing are the S-foils. Again, the forward position is for landing and said to be low altitude, kind of providing close air support. For high altitude or space, though, they're meant to sweep back. And on the Black Series here, they don't really snap into position. They're solid. They don't move, but they just fold. Just friction both directions. It's about how they come out. And this is said to improve the efficiency of the shields and improve heat dispersion. And that might sound funny, but in actual real space, radiating excess heat is very important. So if these act as heat radiators, yeah, I could see that actually being important. And with 4 engines, these are actually similar engines to the X-Wings. They're just larger. The X-Wing has 4L engines. These are J7s. And it actually has the same exact hyperdrive motivator as the X-Wing. But whereas the X-Wing just has 1, this has 4. So more heat, more fuel consumption. Now the X-Wing and this both have a Class 1 hyperdrive, but we'll compare it more later. So yeah, those are the 2 general modes. They haven't read anything that says there'd be an interim, but it would kind of make sense. I mean, that's kind of the point of variable geometry wings in the real world. Again, it has a standard crew, pilot, co-pilot. In fact, the controls are mirrored. They're either side, so you could switch off, because these are designed for long duration missions. In fact, consumables for multiple crew can be carried up for 2 weeks. And as we'll see later, there's quite a bit of space inside. But yeah, that's... oh, one other thing. For some reason on the Black Series, the cannons in front retract. Kind of odd, frankly, because in the real world, they're in Star Wars, they're in a fixed mount. But I digress. That's the Black Series. And now the Hot Wheels. It does not have an opening canopy. The cannons are fixed, and I don't know, it doesn't have any kind of landing gear. And of course, we have the same S-foil system. It's kind of what this does. But these actually pop in. They actually ratchet into position. See? So a little different system. Now, again, back in Universe, this was one of Incom's final designs. Is right before they were going to be nationalized by the Empire. They were going to deliver their first major shipment, and en route it was scheduled to, quote, go missing by Senator Bail Organa. You know, maybe Alderaan had it coming. Vladimir Putin definitely would have thought so. Anyway, they went missing and they appeared in rebel hands. How many? No numbers really ever given, which is good. We don't want to have a countdown, but they do say they would at least be enough for 2 squadrons. But we also know it wasn't a huge shipment because these remained rare throughout the Galactic Civil War. Now, of course, the real reason is they didn't exist in the original trilogy, so to explain why we don't see them everywhere, they just say they only had a handful. And to be fair, this is a pretty specific type craft. The Hot Wheels is actually mostly metal except for the wings, and the Black Series feels lighter. Again, this is one of those few times I think the Hot Wheels is better. Here they are. I don't think the gear, and especially the opening canopy, do much for the Black Series. And the moving guns are just strange. Maybe just to keep them from breaking if you drop it. But really what bugs me about the Black Series are the underside of the wings. They're kind of hollow, just ribbed out there. On the Hot Wheels, at least, they have patterning and are solid. There's only one thing that bugs me about the Hot Wheels. Let me set you down for a second. Fold these up so we can show. I definitely do like how the wings snap. Notice how the engines are pretty even on the Black Series. You know, they're same distance. On the Hot Wheels, you'll notice the lower are shorter. You see this a lot in different little X-Wings too, and there's kind of a real-world explanation on the X-Wing, but for this, I think it was just kind of pre-production. To be fair, the lower aren't super short compared to the upper, but still, if you want to nitpick, you can say that's not completely right. Then again, you know, these are neither one very expensive. Now my one wing here is a little loose, but not too bad. But the Hot Wheels, nice and tight. But neither are great, really. They're small scale die cast. So that's why I was actually pretty happy about the Micro Galaxy. But I didn't know what to think about it, because a lot of times with the Micro Galaxy ships, the larger vehicles get scaled down. They try to keep them 1/72 scale, but they also try to keep them to a price point and to fit in a box. So things like the Millennium Falcon, they did their best, but it's obviously undersized based on the scale chart. So I was kind of expecting the U-Wing, since it's 23 to 25 meters, to be the same. And kind of was, but I wasn't disappointed. So on to the spinny thing. I measured this, and it's just over 12 inches tip to tip with the S-foils forward, which it's basically 1 inch per 6 feet at this scale, which gets us to, let's be generous and say 74 feet. And if we go, say, 24 meters is an in-between, that's 78, 79 feet. So it maybe should have been 13 inches or a little more. An extra inch might have put it almost exactly in scale. But already it looks quite large. Then you do this. Yeah, once you put the S-foils into combat mode, attack mode, space mode, this becomes quite large, especially if someone wants to put it on a shelf like this. I can understand why this is kind of where they have to be. And again, we don't know for sure what scale it is. There could be an episode later on that hasn't been shown yet where the thing looks like it's 30 meters or 15, because Star Wars is not terribly consistent. Am I defending Jazzwares? Yeah, a little bit, because it's pretty big. And for the price point, what do you expect? I mean, it'd be cool if this were die-cast, but it's not. It also would probably be $100 die-cast, to be fair. And it has a lot of features and moving parts, and really helped me understand how the U-Wing works, because remember, blind, can't see it. This spinny thing's kind of served its purpose, so let's move it out of the way. Looking at the underside, we have not one, not two, but 4 landing gear. Instead of having just a single one up front, like we saw on the Black Series, we have 2. And of course, they're not too fancy, they just hinge forward, but they look pretty good when folded in. Can't complain. And it actually impressed me, they went ahead and put the skids on the bottom of the engines because that would be an easy one just to skip and just put kind of a ledge there. It's a little stiff, but they're not going to flop out on you. Again, they can seal pretty well. I've noticed with Jazzwares, it seems like when they have a decision to make the gear up or down and which way they look better, they make them look better up, which I completely agree with. And we have tons of other features to get to, but before we start opening hatches up, I thought it might be even nice to compare with the X-Wing and also just, you know, talk about the specs of this craft, because they are kind of little brother and big brother, and it actually fits. It kind of gives that world building from the same company. So here's the one you saw before in a video, the standard T-65B X-Wing. And while I'm not going to say they're both exactly to 1/72 scale, I'd say they scale well enough with each other. For example, the X-Wing is roughly, or just over half the length, about 12.5 meters. It's actually really hard to get an exact length of an X-Wing. I've seen some as low as 11 meters and some as many as 16. 16 seems like a lot for a snub fighter. Either way, yeah, it seems roughly half. Now the X-Wing with the wings is actually wider than the U-Wing here, and that seems represented. It probably should actually be a little bit wider than it is, but at least the notion is there that this is a wider spacecraft than this. So cool. So in universe, the X-Wing has 4 KX9, sometimes 4 IX4, kind of medium power lasers, and the S foils, of course, they open up here. And the 2 cannon on the U-Wing are the more powerful KX7. These are in fixed mounts and are kind of, like I said, intended for softening up fortifications, maybe troop masses. They could shoot down a starfighter if it got in their path, but it's not really their primary goal. But they are there. Now, they, like I said, essentially use the same engines. For sublights, it's just the U-Wings are larger. They're just scaled up. 4s and 7s. Because of the extra bulk and mass of the U-Wing, it does have a lower sublight atmospheric speed. It's about 950, and the X-Wing is about 1050 kph, although it is said with shielding active it can go faster. Both do have a Class 1 hyperdrive, but again, because of size, this has 4 motivators and this just has 1. So this is all engine in the X-Wing, and on the U-Wing, actually the front part here is your hyperdrive motivator. The X-Wing's hull and shielding are adequate for what it is, but it mostly relies on maneuverability, speed. The U-Wing, since it's a little slower, and more importantly, it has a much wider turning radius, larger silhouette, slower acceleration, even if its top speed isn't that much less than the X-Wings. It does rely on stiffer hull armor, and like I said, with the S-foils in the rear, it can generate quite a strong shield. Even when they're forward, it's still reasonably strong, so it can take a hit. The X-Wing, not near as much, not as tough, but again, it makes up for it. Of course, the X-Wing has torpedoes and all that, and the U-Wing does not. X-Wing has, of course, just a crew of 1 pilot, and because it does not have a nav computer, a jump computer, it actually relies on an astromech to do jump calculations. They're a little too complicated for a human. How spacecraft like the A-Wing and B-Wing deal with it, they're preloaded. The U-Wing is different. It has a crew of 2. Not really even pilot and co-pilot, because they both have the exact same controls, so they can kind of switch out, give the one rest, or one can handle certain operations. And there's no astromech, but it does have a nav computer, more like a capital ship, or at least a medium class transport. And again, like I said with the Black Series, I don't think this opens up on the spacecraft in the film. I think it just does it so you can get in there. One neat thing that they did here that is on the studio model is there is a viewport on the underside that's said to be there so they can monitor the ground, because yeah, in Star Wars we don't actually have drones or, you know, remote cameras. Nah, it's neat. I get it. It is what it is. So I think that's neat that Jazzwares put that in. And if you'll notice, this is quite bulbous, because this actually has a 2-deck arrangement. Well, kind of. A deck and a half. Very again, helicopter-esque. Before I do that, because it'll make my life a little easier, I'm going to fold these wings up. These are neat too, like the Hot Wheels. They actually latch in the back, and then they have a slot they latch into in the front too. In the back, it's just kind of a detent. In the front, it does physically plug in. That's neat and thoughtful. And the X-Wing, of course, with its S-foils, ratchets too. Here it is with the landing gear up, what have you. To get to our interior, our cargo hold or crew bay, you first lift this up and then you pop this off. This is just an entire plate that lifts off instead of being hinged, and I like how they do these because they have multiple points. They are rather tight when new, but this is the interior. And this is where the old action fleet probably would have let us down. For one thing, it would have been much smaller. And for another, you would have had the cockpit and maybe a little bit back here, but the old action fleet wasn't much in the interiors. And this one is pretty complete. It might be slightly compacted because of, again, necessity, but not in any meaningful way. So this is really the primary goal of the U-Wing transport. So you have kind of the front cockpit compartment with the 2 seats, and then you have kind of a faux doorway here with a small work area behind, and then you have your crew compartment back here. Now when Incom designed this was all modular back here. This could be completely stripped out and made hollow, or it could have seats put in, however many you want. The real Blackhawk could carry up to 11 people, not to mention its crew of up to 4. The U-Wing, most websites don't actually give an exact number of how many troops it could carry. The only number you sometimes read is 8. And so this is pretty close. We have positions for 7 back here, 6 seated, and then 1 standing. And this would be our crew chief. Again, it'd be cool, and if they'd made it maybe 13 inches, they could have had that extra couple of seats, but frankly, I mean, you could easily stand a couple of guys behind the cockpit there in that area if you really wanted to. Being realistic, I don't think they could have done a better job. But I'm glad they at least showed that it could carry a squadron, because that's really what the rebels use these for. When they got them from Bale, that was around 2 BBY, maybe early 1 BBY, and they were very quickly put into service as troop transports, cargo haulers, and interestingly, some were reconfigured as electronic warfare craft, much like the Black Hawk. You can tell they're taking inspiration. That's fine. That's cool, actually. And there was a civilian version that was made in limited numbers called the BT-45D, but it lacked shields, and it lacked any kind of weaponry or hull armor. It was literally just a transport. There was even an early version, we see it in Rebels, that has 2 engines instead of 4 and no S-foils. So Incom made a few early styles, but we see this with other aircraft, or spacecraft rather, like their X-Wing. And that's a good kind of segue to talk about what is this starfighter support craft, and a couple more features of the MGS here. Moving over to the lower side, we have a true working cargo door. You kind of pop it out and then it just slides back on a pretty cool hinge. Get it here. There we go. I didn't want to force it. I'd rather go gentle with it because it is a number of moving parts. And it opens. There we go. I was like, I know it opens all the way. There we go. Just a little sticky in the middle. Again, I like to go slow and careful with everything. But yeah, it's actually a working cargo door that pops out and comes back. And you can see the 3 seats there. For the troops. Of course, if you were to land it with the gear, close that, you'd have them on the ground without gear, and just off the ground they could step off with it. So the Rebels definitely use these as troop transports. But as shipped from Incom, those 2 laser cannon in the front, while they were actually powerful enough to even punch through the shields and hull of a frigate or light cruiser, they weren't too useful against starfighters or ground elements. And again, this needed to be used for close support. So something that Incom did not include, but they made, provisions for, were mounting door guns. Again, much like the MH-60 over there. And this is on this side of the model or toy right in here. Not only does the gun swing out, it actually has some articulation, certainly up and down. Of course, it rotates within reason. That's pretty neat. Now again, this is an optional thing. Some sources say that there are up to 2 of these, some say just 1. Seems like it's just they could have 1, 0, or none, and they can be pretty much any infantry-based weapon on a pintle mount. This is an M45 repeating ion cannon, and we even have that standing up crew chief to man it. Maybe shoot some AT-ACTs as on Scarif. And you see various crew I've got in here. Obviously it did not come with all these, but it actually came with 3. You did get, of course, Andor, Urso, and K2SO. And for the rest, I had a couple of the Rebel Commandos from the Millennium Falcon, which I didn't actually put in there because I thought they were neat and I wanted to save them for something more. And then I put the Indoor Luke and Leia from the Speeders in there just to kind of make a team. I thought that would be neat. It's not movie correct, but that's okay. Just, You know, I wish I had 6 or 7 commandos. I'd fill her up, but, you know, did my best. And I do think it's neat that even with the gun folded up and the hatch closed, it doesn't keep you from putting figures in the left side seats. I was a little concerned it might get in the way. But nope, it folds in such a way that it does not. In fact, it's not that difficult to fill up all 3 seats in a row. Takes a little fiddling, but it's not too bad. They all have clips and what have you. And again, they look quite correct, I would say. And with these side doors, what I've discovered, when you want to close them, obviously just slide them forward, but before you latch them in, try to get the bottom lip in first, and then they close really easy. Because if you just try to go straight in, I feel like the bottom lip doesn't always connect and kind of sticks out and looks stupid and it's not as secure. But yeah, it's a pretty secure mechanism. So like I said, pretty feature packed. I'm not sure what else more you could do. I mean, again, if they had 8 seats, sure. If it was 13 inches versus 12, sure. But come on, guys, this was $25 shipped, so you know, hey, I think so you gotta kind of get that bottom in. Again, this side is a little stiffer than the other. There we go. Trying to get it nice and flush, and everything does fit quite well on this. But what do you think? So I am quite well impressed with Jazzware's efforts here. I've seen some online say that they've had problems with their S-foils, their wings, but mine seem fine. Maybe they're just not popped in all the way, because one of mine really did take some force to pop in correctly. And I've seen some say that they don't sweep back far enough. I don't think so. They seem right, at least compared to these other couple. The Black Series kind of gives the impression they go back further, but that's actually because the hinge point is in a different location. Like if you, sorry, the Hot Wheels I meant to say. It's further back, and that's actually another thing I don't think is correct. It might look cooler, but from what I can tell, these with the wings in a more center point are correct. And it actually scales quite well with the real world Blackhawk. Not perfectly, but well, and ditto for the T-65. Of course, in universe, we see these used in Rebels a few times. We saw Guerrera's Partisans, they have 1x1 BBY. The Rebels, the Ghost Crew, have one. Fun fact, this originally in the real world was supposed to be like a small support craft, much like a helicopter, operating from a larger ship, kind of like the Ghost and Phantom. But as development went on, they consolidated it, made this a little bigger, and it just became its own craft. And we see 2 of these in, well, actually 3 important ones in Rogue One. The first one, Bravo 1, was actually flown by K2SO and Andor to rescue Jin from the prison planet. And then the next one was actually flown to Jeddah, and then that would of course go on to quote-unquote rescue her father, or assassinate him. And that second one was lost there, and then after that they took the stolen Imperial transport. But then we see a few of these in the hands of Blue Squadron at the Battle of Scarif, which is technically right before 0 BBY. And while many were lost in space, and only one actually made it past the Stargate, the Shield Gate, to the surface and was lost too, it did actually use its door gun to blow up some walkers and attack some troops, and it did deliver its infantry before ending. So while it was lost, it was successful in a way. And that wasn't all the U-Wings. It said that at least one was at Yavin Base, but probably more for the Battle of the Death Star. And then they're kind of inserted into canon throughout. For example, it said that 3 or 4 were at Endor, used to try to capture Imperial Star Destroyers, which does gel. We know that some ISDs were captured in that battle. And then a couple were used to help liberate Naboo afterwards, and a few served into the New Republic era. Again, we don't know how many UT-60Ds were made. We do know it wasn't a full run because Incom was taken over and turned nationalized, essentially disbanded. But since they used so many of the same components as an X-Wing, and since the Rebels eventually were able to make their own X-Wings, I don't see why they couldn't make their own U-Wings too. I mean, they made B-Wings. But no, I think it's a neat craft. It complements without trying to replace what's already there. It has its own unique design aesthetic, but it also matches in with what we already know. And I'm definitely impressed. This is one of the better larger scale from Jazzwares. I tend to like their smaller scale stuff more because it seems like when you go to their large scale, they had to make enough compromises to get them in a box. Some I haven't been super happy with. The assault shuttle for the Bad Batch, kind of not impressed with it. I think that was maybe a little much because it's such a large ship that trying to scale it down. I appreciate their effort. It needed to be at least a little more to scale like this, and so I was kind of afraid we'd have a repeat of that situation here, and we don't. On the other hand, the Imperial Shuttle is pretty good, but I'd say this is better, at least to scale and features. The Imperial Shuttle is neat, but you don't have a working boarding ramp, and it is a little scaled down because it has to be. I like that this has working things. If you're gonna do it right. I hope they don't try to do too large scale. That to me back in the day was the downfall of the action fleet, when they try to do too big. Stick to your figure size. I think they were smart to do the 1-inch figures. I almost wish they had just made the figures not even articulated, just like in a seated position where they just came in and out, but that would kind of defeat the purpose of what they're trying to do. So yeah, just thought I'd do a video. Why not? I don't know. Just trying to have some fun. But I thought it was a neat ship. And we haven't done many Star Wars lately. So with that, let me know what you think. What's your favorite Rebel fighter? I have a hard time picking. There's a lot I do like. This is going to sound sacrilegious. It's not the X-Wing. It's probably either the Y-Wing or the B-Wing. I don't know. But let me know. I did actually record a TIE Fighter Micro Galaxies a couple months ago, but that's when the microphone cut out, so I have not had a chance to re-record it. Might do that next. We'll see. With that, this is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.